The global insurance industry is more than a market.
It's a movement powered by 3 million professionals around the world.
Together, we support communities as they rebuild after disaster.
Help businesses through risk and uncertainty.
Protect individuals as they plan for brighter futures.
This impact isn't possible without people.
That's why we attract, grow, and retain the very best talent.
Because when every voice is heard,
When every person feels they belong.
We don't just build careers.
We build a better tomorrow.
Belonging builds 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 tomorrow.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to AI and the Future of Work. My name is Stephen Tufton, and I'm Director of AI at Steadfast. Today, we're presenting from Steadfast Group Head Office in Sydney, Australia, as a hybrid session. Before we begin, I'd like to read an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Steadfast acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we work and live. We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and the elders past and present. Sorry, just having a problem with my clicker. So, ladies and gentlemen, the feeling that our world of work is changing is palpable. And it's driven in part by hype around artificial intelligence and the very real fear of job displacement due to this new and emerging technology. For some jobs, this fear is entirely justified. However, there is more to our future of work than replacement by a robot. In this session, we'll cut through some of the hype and learn how we can be part of a collaborative future with AI. So, let's dive in. Before we start, here are some caveats I have to display. However, here's a caveat I really wanted to show. You may be pleased to know that the presentation was 20% assisted with AI-enabled research, but 80% human effort. So hopefully that is the future. And no robot dogs were harmed in the making of this presentation. Now, like the AI revolution today, almost 500 years ago, a different revolution was just getting started. The year was 1589, and William Lee, English clergyman, invents the stocking frame knitting machine. Now, this invention was so revolutionary that when he applied for a patent, Queen Victoria I refused on the basis that it would cause mass unemployment amongst her people. So what did William Lee do? He fled to France, where the new king, the first king of France, issued him a patent. Fast forward to the early 19th century, and across the UK and Europe, mechanical knitting frames were slowly replacing textile workers, which made up the vast bulk of people working in that industry. Now, in response, the Luddites, named after a gentleman called Ken Ludd, a 16-year-old who, in a fit of drunken rage one night, went to his boss's workplace and smashed a weaving loom. This revolution spread across Europe. They started smashing machines. The Luddites were afraid. They were afraid of losing their jobs and raging against the machine, against these assemblies of wood and iron that could do their job faster and cheaper. These machines didn't get tired, and they didn't join a union, and they didn't get paid. It was a cry of defiance against a future they never asked for and they never foresaw. Does this sound familiar? Well, today, the machine isn't a mechanical knitting frame. Today, it's an algorithm. Today, it's artificial intelligence. So is our future one of job displacement or workforce transformation? It's worth noting that the knitting frame required a new set of skills. Its adoption fostered a domestic industry, call it the 19th century gig economy, where people would have knitting frames in their homes. And this was even before the large-scale textile factories were established. Its introduction led to productivity boost, net job creation over the next 100 years as the global textile industry boomed. Clothing became cheaper, more people were required to make those clothes with this new technology. Are we on the same trajectory with the current revolution in AI? Let's find out. In March this year, the World Economic Forum published their Future of Jobs Outlook based on a survey they conducted in 2024 across all global industries, public, private, non-profit organisations. The report provides insightful analysis on how our jobs will soon change and what skills will become more important in the future and how we can adapt and use these changes to move ourselves individually and our organisations and society forward. There's one message from not just this study, but data from the OECD, from the International Labour Organisation that's very clear. Change is coming and it's evenly distributed across all kinds of jobs, to blue collar, to white collar, to every industry. Are we prepared? Are you prepared? Can you adapt? And what will this technology mean for diversity in the workplace? Will it help or hinder? By 2030, the World Economic Forum forecasts almost 40% of core worker skills will need to change. We'll talk a bit later about what that means for how we address that challenge. Now, the World Economic Forum also estimates that by 2030, 92 million jobs across all industries will be displaced by technology and 170 million will be created. So there will actually be a net job creation from these disruptions, but there will be disruptions. Unfortunately, the Luddites didn't see the new jobs of the Industrial Revolution coming. They couldn't imagine telephone operators, factory managers, electricians, or conductors. But we have the fortunate position to have this kind of data to help us plan better for our future. They only saw the world that they knew. They failed to see the beginning of a new one. So you may be thinking, is my job at risk? Let's find out. This Future of Jobs survey gathered insights from employers on job roles expected to grow, decline, or remain stable within their particular organisation over the next 5 years. Respondents were then asked to identify macro trends and technological advancements that were driving job growth and decline in their organisations. Respondents expected across the board the fastest declining roles to include various clerical roles such as admin assistants and executive secretaries, alongside historically safer groups like accountants and auditors. Broadening digital access, AI and information processing technologies, robots, autonomous systems are the primary drivers for this decline. An ageing and declining working age population and slower economic growth also are contributing to decline in those traditionally back office clerical administrative roles. Now, looking at these jobs, it's perhaps no surprise that manually repetitive jobs involving data entry, numeracy, literacy skills will be somewhat hardest hit. From an insurance perspective, admin staff will probably experience the greatest disruption. On this chart, which I've extracted from their report, I showed the top 15 fastest declining jobs. No surprise, postal clerks are at the top. Luckily, we're not in the postal service, so that's great. Bank tellers are number 2, but number 3, data entry operators. And data entry as a skill is something that lots of different jobs do. But interestingly, there's a very insurance-specific one a bit further down the list: claims adjusters, examiners, and investigators. Because over time, what do these jobs do? They inspect. That can be replicated with AI, computer vision, with advanced models that detect hailstone damage, property damage. Insurers are already using AI insights from satellite imagery and aerial imagery to detect property damage, flooding, and natural catastrophes. So to me, it's no surprise that that is in that top 15 list. Now, what does it mean for a specific job in insurance? So because we're a broker network, the largest across Australia and New Zealand, I focused in on brokers and authorised representatives. In our market, these are advisors to customers. They advise on the best insurance to take up, and they also broker the sale. They're intermediaries. So looking at the International Labour Organisation categorisations, I found the 2 closest matches, which were financial and investment advisors and sales and purchasing agents and brokers. And what do we see here? We actually see a net growth. Well, this is interesting. Haven't they been talking about automating end-to-end insurance and replacing advisors and brokers with robots? Not necessarily. So why is there a net growth in this particular job? Well, this is interesting because if my clicker works. Okay, so what they say is that skills unlikely to be replaced in the next 5 years include those reliant on human interaction, including empathy and active listening, skills requiring nuanced problem solving and understanding and a conceptual understanding of the world, and deep subject matter expertise. While some of these can be emulated with the current generation of generative AI technology, they're not perfect, and they're not at a point where we might trust a fully automated agent to talk to a client. And if we did, we'd probably have a call from the regulator here in this market. But what are the skills that will be automated? So for these particular jobs, it's data entry, right? And so that will result in more face-to-face interpersonal contact between the broker or the sales rep and the client. Now, what are the technology trends that are driving this transformation? So 60% of employers expect broadening digital access, which includes access to tools like AI, to transform their business than any other trend. This growing digital access is a key enabler for these new technologies. And of the 9 technologies that are listed here, two stand out as having the greatest impact. AI is number one at 86%, impacting 86% of organisations. And number two are robots and autonomous systems. Fortunately, we're not a factory here in this company, so we don't have robots moving around. But if you're a manufacturing, it would have a huge impact. Now, what is driving this growth in the use of AI? Well, largely it is the emergence of generative AI technology, which became democratised in the form of ChatGPT in November 2022. Investment in that sector of the tech industry has increased eightfold since 2022. Money is pouring in, fueling development of technologies that leverage generative AI, but now also leveraging automation. So blending those two technologies together to create what we call agentic AI. Agentic AI allows someone to define a process and end-to-end. It's carried out by an automated assistant, hopefully under the governance and guide and oversight of a human. Now, the long-term productivity gains from the technology remains uncertain. Workplace studies have identified initial ways for generative AI to enhance performance and enhance skills. Some of these studies have highlighted that for generative AI to enhance human core skills or to substitute tacit knowledge amongst newer or average performing workers. So if you're new to a role, AI can certainly help compress it's called experience compression. You can learn faster. You can use that technology to become more knowledgeable more quickly. But once you become experienced, use AI in different ways. So there will be benefits that are unevenly distributed depending on the kind of role, your experience, and the kind of work you're doing. But change is coming to every role. Now, that leads us to a discussion about human versus machine. So how much of our work is going to be fully automated versus augmented? In an ideal world, I think we'd all like it to be augmented, having that smart assistant that can help us do our jobs more productively and efficiently. But the reality is it's not worth us doing certain kinds of jobs like data entry. It adds no value. So there is a split between technology only or AI only, human only tasks and collaborative. And this is really where we're going to get the greatest productivity boosts, in my opinion. Currently, 25% of tasks across all industries are fully automated. Another 30% are a combination of technology supporting human work, and 47%, I had to look at my screen there, is pure human tasks. So human working independent of technology. That's going to dramatically shift by 2030 across all industries to roughly a third split. So 33 or 34% will be automated, 33 collaborative, and 33 human only. Now, what about insurance? Well, the report actually splits out by industry what the actual impact is. For insurance, currently 41% of all tasks are human only, but by 2030 it will drop down to 25%. And 97% of that change is due to AI and automation. Now, what does that mean for future skills that we need to adapt and use the technology effectively? I love this quote. In a world run by AI, human qualities in our work become ever more important. I think the message here is that AI will not completely replace us, but rather it will propel us forward if we have the right mindset. It will handle the monotonous, the repetitive, the soul-crushing parts of our job, which we all have, and hopefully it'll free us up to do what we as humans do best. Personally, I'm waiting for it to take out the garbage at home, but that's another problem. So what we do best as humans is we create, we connect with each other, we empathise, we strategise, and we lead. We're not in a battle against the machine. We're on the cusp of a partnership with it. The loom didn't end the textile industry, it revolutionised it. So what are the skills that are going to become important? Well, this chart illustrates employer expectations for the evolution of skills in the next 5 years. It highlights that the greatest growth will be in roles that we don't even exist for many of us today. Some of these are technology specific, like AI and big data actually captures a huge raft of job roles and skills. Then cyber security. Well, not all of us are going to be cyber security professionals, but get down to the third skill and we start to see things that everyone can work on. Excuse me. So these skills are deeply, profoundly human. Analytical thinking, creative thinking, resilience, flexibility, curiosity, lifelong learning. AI will do the same for knowledge work, for health, discovery and creativity that the weaving loom did for the textile industry. Again, here I've highlighted some of the skills with a triangle to say these are ones that really anyone in the insurance space, whether they're technical or not, can start to develop. Whether you wait for your company to help you or not, get on the journey. So a few of these, motivation, self-awareness, analytical thinking. Amazingly, these, if you form a Venn diagram between these and what recruiters and companies are now looking for in new hires, it's almost a perfect match. My clicker's not liking me today. Okay. So now AI is a big technology space. Generative AI is one major part of the AI world. What is its impact going to be on different roles? Well, this was looking through a different lens. So this study, which drew from an International Labour Organisation project, looked at GPT version 4 Omni, which came out last year. They mapped it against over 2,800 very granular skills, which were then mapped to jobs, and evaluated the capacity of substituting a human task for a generative AI supported task. And so what you see are the blue bars represent a low ability for Gen AI to replace that role. So up top, we have AI and big data. Well, obviously AI is going to help us with AI and big data and with reading, writing and maths. I fear for our children who are losing some of these skills, but it's going to happen. Marketing and media. Well, that was one of the first places where generative AI started to have an impact, marketing and communications, because suddenly I could create advertising copy in a couple of seconds. I could create a first draft of a mock-up of an image I wanted the photographer to take. So it made that industry much more efficient and much more productive, and they're reaping the benefits of it. But also across industries, suddenly industries that could never afford a graphic artist can produce content with generative AI. So it really has transformed that particular set of skills. But we get a bit further down. So multilingualism, being able to learn another language. How many people try now when they go overseas? Just take Google Translate, right? Which is powered by AI. But further down at the bottom, you start to see the ones where there'll be very low impact in the short term, We see things like empathy and active listening. I have this friend who works in ethics. He's worked in that field for a long time, and he's working for a government agency. And he was having this, he's into philosophy, he was doing deep and meaningful conversation with ChatGPT. And after about half an hour, it said, I can't continue this conversation. And he said to me, why is that? I go, well, you've hit what's called a context window. So all of these technologies, they have a limit of attention span. My wife can remember conversations I had with her 20 years ago. I can't remember them, but she can, right? So she's 1,000 times more effective at active listening than conversational agent. It'll take some time for them to pick up that skill, right? So there's a lot of skills that AI just isn't capable of handling effectively at the moment. So how do we manage these changes? Having anticipated a significant skill disruption, employers have increasingly invested in reskilling and upskilling initiatives to align the workforce skills with these evolving demands of these technology changes. So according to the surveyed employers in their study, for a representative sample of 100 workers, 41 will not require significant training by 2030. 11 will require training, but it won't be accessible to them yet because we don't know what that training looks like. And 29% will require training and be upskilled within their current roles. That's who we need to focus on first, because that kind of training is available and we know their jobs are going to change. So let's start the conversation now. Additionally, employers anticipate 19 out of those 100 workers will require training and be reskilled and redeployed within their organisation. So maybe moving into a totally different role. So the anticipated need for training varies, of course, across industries and geographies, but the outlook is very clear. We need to get people to start reimagining what their job is going to look like in 3 years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years. I'm going to retire in 10 years. I'm not too worried about that, but I'm thinking about my kids. I'm telling them you have to think about what your job is going to look like in 10 years, not just at graduation. Now, this survey also found that 86% of employers expected AI and information processing technologies to transform their business by 2030. And in the financial sector, it's notably higher, that percentage. Larger organisations are considerably more impacted. They're more likely to be transformed by AI simply because of their scale. 94% of companies with over 50,000 employees expect moderate to high AI exposure in the workplace by 2030. And that includes most of the large insurers, reinsurers, carriers, broker networks around the world. Reskilling and upskilling of the existing workforce to work effectively alongside AI is what they're doing. And this is 45 out of 55 economies covered by the report. 77% of surveyed employees plan to implement this strategy. So if you're thinking about having these conversations now, reskilling and upskilling, you're not alone. Everyone else is thinking the same thing. So let's talk about AI and diversity. What will this technology mean for diversity in the workplace, and will it help or hinder? This is my quote, by the way. If you want to attribute it to me, that's fine. So I was thinking about how I describe this and I couldn't find a suitable quote, so I just wrote down what I was thinking. So this, in my opinion, I believe that AI has the ability to either amplify or, if used responsibly, or dampen systemic and implicit bias across society. But it depends on how we use it and what AI technology we use and deploy. And this is an important consideration across a whole lot of areas. If you talk to recruiters that are using AI to scan CVs, half of them aren't even aware of the training problem with AI built for those systems, where me as a middle-aged white man may have been preferred for positions in middle management in historical CVs that we use to train that AI model. So, of course, that's just entrenching systemic bias in my favour. If I'm a person of colour or a woman, it goes against me when I'm applying for a job. So these are important considerations, and they will differ depending on what type of industry you're in. So why is it a problem? So first of all, generative AI, I've talked about broadly, but why is it a problem with training of that type of AI? Well, generative AI really kicked off with the creation of language models that aim to replicate a realistic human conversation. Right? And so originally they were just called language models, but then they grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And once they got past a certain size, they called them large language models. So if you hear the term LLM, large language model, that's what sits behind ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, Meta's Llama, Anthropic's Claude, all of those AI conversation tools. The majority of those are trained on uncurated data. What do I mean by that? I mean that over the last 17 years, there's this database called Common Crawl that has been accumulating and scraping content from websites globally, long before generative AI became a thing. And it was really an academic exercise to create a database of textual content for researchers in natural language processing to use. And so when OpenAI created ChatGPT, what did they use? Well, let's use that database because it saves us a whole lot of time. The problem is no one selectively said, don't pull data from this website or that website. So what happened? We had trusted and untrusted data in that data set. We have biased and non-biased information. We have facts and misinformation. We have bias. And so the good, the bad, and the ugly of the internet. And because of that, that training, these models just reinforce those biases. So we can't always trust the output of the responses. They may be biased despite filters that go in front of them, like guardrails. And there's still a risk that you may get hate speech, violence, inequity, or discrimination out of these language models. And it's all to do with the way they're trained. Now, if you think, well, why doesn't that happen with a human? Well, it does if you didn't educate them correctly. We curate what they learn in primary school and high school and university, and there's a curriculum. And we curate the learning experience. And so when someone comes out of a university degree, we know exactly what they know because it's part of the curriculum. We have no idea what a lot of these language models have taken on board as part of their training. Well, in fact, we do. If you've got the time, if you've got 24,000 years, you can read through all the web pages that they've scraped. But it's impractical. Some companies have tried to address this. So IBM, for example, they create their own language model and they went through and cut out all of the Reddit feeds. They only included peer-reviewed science journals, authoritative government organisations. So their models aren't as maybe sophisticated, you could argue, but they're more accurate. By the way, that's not a sales pitch for IBM. There's many more companies that are doing a great job in that space, but that was one example. So why is this a problem? Because if we use the technology in the wrong way, it can result in a lack of diversity in new hires if we're using it as part of a recruitment tool. The potential of harmful stereotypes if we're using to generate textual content that goes into a media release or into internal communications or even into a legal contract. So there are a lot of repercussions for using generative AI and language models if we don't consider these risks. And these will impact, of course, diversity and equity in the workplace. To give you an idea of what an issue this can be, the OECD have been tracking failures in AI for the last 3.5 years. They've got public data you can download on this. I downloaded it, did this graph. Almost 8,500 failures or incidents, and has its potential for failure across all industries. This is based on public information. What they then did is they mapped these to AI principles that the OECD has established that a lot of governments now follow, including Australia and New Zealand. Interestingly, I didn't highlight it in blue, but the number one was accountability, the lack of human oversight around AI. And of course, without proper oversight, systemic bias coming out of these tools can then propagate across the organisation. But I highlighted ones in blue that really could impact human rights, well-being, human agency or autonomy, fairness, and even safety. So these are 51% of incidents were a result of failure of transparency and explainability, being able to explain how it came up with that answer. 39% impacting were a failure to consider human well-being. 36% a failure to respect human rights. 25% a failure to respect democracy and human autonomy. And 21% to respect fairness and equity. And if that trend continues without any work being done to dampen some of these issues with these models, it's going to start to infuse other systems. You get a Gen AI system, integrate it with something else, and suddenly these biases propagate. So it's a real issue that the industry needs to solve collaboratively with the consumers of this technology. And you think, well, that's out of my control. What can I possibly do? Well, the famous scholar and poet George Michael, pop singer from the 80s, Choose Life. I don't know if you remember that. It was on his T-shirt. You know, I think he was ahead of his time. I think what he really meant was choose large language models incorporating fairness and equity. So I hope George would be happy with that reuse of his brand. I didn't ask him permission for that, so I hope he's not on the call. Now, how can we prepare as individuals for this collaborative future? So I've noted here 5 skills I think are worth developing for anyone, regardless of role. And some of these you may already have. Some of these you may want to perfect, right? It's not necessarily technology skills. So firstly, creative and critical thinking. Critical thinking is super important now because of the propagation of misinformation, especially with our kids, teaching them. There are now courses in some countries in the curriculum to teach, I think it's the Netherlands, to teach kids to think critically when they're looking at content on social media or generated out of AI. Curiosity and lifelong learning. I think I've got a few lawyers in the room here. I'm a technologist. We're used to trying to keep up with case law and with the changes in technology, but not every job is like that. And I think we all, regardless of our job, we need to get used to the fact that the technology is going to affect all of us and we need to be lifelong learners and be curious. Empathy and active listening, very important skills if we're going to be doing more people-to-people conversations and letting the machines take over the drudgery. Being resilient, flexible and agile, being adaptable, not being afraid of the technology, but embracing it and thinking about how we can rethink our job in the context of these changes. And lastly, AI literacy. Now, AI literacy isn't about becoming an AI expert. It's becoming knowledgeable enough that you know what it can and can't do, You know what's hype and what's not hype. And you start to see through some of that hype that's happening on social media. So you can make informed and sensible decisions about how to use the technology. So what can we do within our organisation? Well, here are 4 questions I think we should all ask ourselves and our organisations that we work for. Does your business have AI principles that support fairness and diversity? 2, do the AI tools that you use support responsible AI practices? When we onboard a vendor, we look at their AI policy. Do they have one? Do they align to transnational principles around responsible AI? Are employees empowered to raise concerns about AI? And I think what goes along with that is, as organisations, we should engage with our staff and bring them on the journey. And finally, get everyone to think, what does your job look like in 3 to 5 years if you could change it for the better using technology and automation? The last thing I'll leave you with, which goes back to my previous slide, is start your journey now. Start becoming more AI literate. Again, it's not about being an AI expert, but just understanding the ups and downs, the good and bad of technology and where it's useful. And you'll be halfway there to developing that mindset and understanding how it can help you in your role in your organisation. There were a number of sources I used for this presentation. This is only the first 5. I actually had a list of about 20. There are links on here to the IBM Cost of Data Breach report. Interestingly, 20% of data breaches reported in that analysis were due to people bringing AI to work that wasn't sanctioned by the organisation, putting commercial information into AI. Interesting study. The OECD, the Incidents and Hazards Database, World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report. The International Labour Organization has a lot of interesting material. Some of that mapping to the 2,800 skills was derived from that research, and the OECD Future of Work report. And there's many others, of course. So I hope you found this session interesting. We're running a QA now via Slido. So what we might do is just give everyone a minute to get their phone, scan the QR code and jump onto the Slido. And if you want to ask a question of me, and while we're waiting for that to happen, I'll have a glass of water and see if there's any questions from the audience in the room. For those in the room, I'll send you the pack. It's okay. You don't need to take a photo. Oh, sorry, you didn't the QR code. Of course, of course.
First questions come in. Talking about fairness, assuring AI systems do not result in unfair discrimination against individuals or groups. Have you got any thoughts on how it can be made more inclusive and accessible?
So it's important to look at the impact of the AI system we're starting to use. So a lot of the governmental regulations that are either established or being developed, for example, the EU AI Act, the Australian government is developing legislation around applications of high-risk AI. So what do we mean by high risk? High risk to humans is where it impacts our ability to earn income, our livelihood, our life. So naturally, it impacts the military, paramedics, hospitals, medical profession. Life insurance is called out specifically in high risk, which will be relevant for some people on the call. So the impact there is where it impacts a person directly, and it has a big impact, a significant impact on their livelihood, right? it may discriminate, even if it's not a high impact one. There may be implicit bias in there. The only way you're going to avoid that is with the vendor who is selling you that solution. There are benchmarks out there which can be used to evaluate the equity or fairness in those language models. And so there are benchmarks that people can run and test. Is this representative data that's being used to train the model? Are the outputs representative of the population in terms of culture and language and socioeconomic demographics? So there are benchmarks out there. I'm not across all of them, but that would be my first question. Whoever's building the AI solution should be using some sort of benchmark to assess the fairness and equity. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but hopefully it did.
Yeah. There's another question. There's a couple of questions that come in, and this one's from Anonymous. They said, what a fantastic presentation. For those who work in DEI, how do you see their jobs practically changing over the coming years, and what way they add value for organisations?
I think it's, if you're working in DEI, and I'd also wrap up people and culture in that bucket, you need to be conscious of the kind of biases that can result from this technology and why that's happening. If you understand the why, then you're in a better position to ask the right questions of vendors and even business colleagues who are looking to onboard a solution. Yeah. So again, it comes back to AI literacy and understanding how these models are trained.
It's quite a few questions.
Questions there?
What can be done to reduce hallucinations? Is there any way to control them completely with 100% accuracy?
No, there isn't. Not with language models. So language models are what we call probabilistic. Okay, so you've got data going in, and then it's building up this huge network of what simulates the human brain. And so like in our brain, you've got neurons connect to each other with different strengths or weights. And those strengths can change every time you feed new data in. And so think of it like a percentage. It's got 50% chance of firing that neuron, 49% that one. And so when you map that out across billions of these neurons, you get a very non-deterministic output. You can't reliably explain how we got to the decision unless you understand all the data that was used to train it and you understand the internal workings of that model. So it's very hard to make it deterministic. What I mean by that is you put the same prompt in again, you get exactly the same output. Very hard to make that happen, but you can do it. And it's very hard to explain why it came up with that answer, right? So with hallucinations, that's about truth being true or not, right? It doesn't understand what true and false is. It only understands the data it's been fed, and it's mashing it up to produce a response. To answer your question, it doesn't know if that's factual or not. So to me, I hate the term hallucination because it's doing exactly what it's programmed to do. It just doesn't understand what misinformation and hallucination is. So therefore, we need to ask the right questions about, was it trained responsibly? Do you have guardrails to stop misinformation? And that's where most of the effort is going with these vendors. Instead of fixing the problem at source by changing the way they train, they're just putting guardrails in front to stop this offensive output being produced. And the problem with that approach is you're never going to catch everything.
Are you okay for a couple more questions?
Yeah.
So there's one around basic AI. What do you think the best basic AI tool is for a beginner?
So if we're talking about just at home to use to probably a conversational assistant, right? Like, and I'll mention a few, so I'm not picking anyone, right? Of course, everyone knows about ChatGPT. Google has Gemini, which is a great language model. Anthropic has Claude. They're the big players, right? They're the ones that people typically go to first. So just try one of those, but there's plenty others out there. And just have a play with it and see how good or bad it is, right? And always be critical. of what it produces. There's been a lot of work to try and make these things solve problems. The reasoning, it's better at reasoning. You know how they evaluate that? They give it standardised tests. Here's a grade school 8 test from the United States as a benchmark. Well, that's a fixed set of questions. So every time what they're doing, they're tuning the models to get them better and better at answering those same questions. Apple Research did an interesting study last year. What they did is they took the grade school 8 maths test. They took every question, like Sally has $5, she wants to buy oranges and apples, that kind of problem. And then they replaced every name and every number with a multitude of different ones. So for each original question, there were 1,000 variations. Suddenly, they didn't do so well at solving the problem. So there wasn't this ability to transfer the learning from that specific problem to answer those other ones. So now these AI companies are trying to make that work better. But the fundamental problem is these are computer scientists. They don't understand how the brain actually works. We have 86 billion neurons in our brain, about 13 trillion connections between them. The biggest AI model at the moment is probably about 3% the size of our brain in terms of complexity. And it's wired very rigidly. In our brain, we've got neuroplasticity. We can grow new neurons. We can kill them. I kill them regularly with the tequila, right? But you can't do that. As soon as you add a single neuron into a set of 1 billion in one of these models, you've got to retrain the whole thing, right? So it's very rigid. And it's designed for language. Now they're trying to get it to do other things as well. So there's a lot of technical problems with where the industry is at the moment. And for them to take the next leap to where they want it to go, which is really emulating how we think, there's a couple of challenges they need to solve.
A couple more questions. One of them is about how can we monitor what our competitors are doing in AI?
Well, unless you've got corporate espionage happening, which I wouldn't encourage, just keeping across what's happening in the media, because as soon as someone does something with AI, they want to tell the world about it, right? So in our case in Australia, it'll be the insurance news, or someone else will pick up and run with it. In fact, although that OECD database, that's just harvesting data from popular news sites and media. They're not going and asking people, they're just scraping that data and using it to build this database.
And then just one more. So if organisations can only choose one LLM to be used, does that take other credible tools or to be used in a more underground matter and risks associated?
Okay, so...
Probably two questions there.
Yeah. So firstly, I can't recommend any one technology, right? So I might get sued by the competitor. But what I would say is you shouldn't go to a large language model like ChatGPT expecting it to solve a technical problem in your job. These are brute tools, brute force tools. They're not designed for any one specific activity. What you're better off doing, in the case, legal's a great example. There's a lot of companies doing excellent work with AI, but what they're doing is they're building and training their own models. There's one in the UK, and they've built their own model from scratch, and they've trained it just on contracts they've read through as humans, so they know what a good contract looks like, and it can help you write a contract, right? That's a great use of the technology, and it's been responsibly trained. Adobe, as one example, similar to IBM, they curate all of the images used in their models called Firefly to generate images and content in their tools. So in terms of would I trust that? Yes. I actually tell my marketing comms team to use that, but not use DALL-E, which has been trained on indiscriminately scraped images off the internet. And there's lots of lawsuits going on, so just be aware of this. In fact, Anthropic settled the other day for, I think it was 1.8 billion. I could be off there, but it was over $1 billion with, I think it was with Bloomberg and maybe Meta. I could be wrong, but they settled with two big companies, and because they'd used their content to train their model. Stability, which makes stable diffusion. They've got lots of lawsuits going on because they just scrape images and even frames of videos indiscriminately. There's two There's a case against two AI song producer companies, Suno and Audio, and one of them, someone put in a prompt to say, can you create a song, a pop song, sort of 70s vibe, maybe a Swedish band, royalty involved. What do you think happened? Not word for word the same, but it sounded exactly like the melody line, Dancing Queen. Well, guess what they used to train the models on? Stuff they didn't have permission to use. So that's a big problem. So I don't think there's any one tool that's the right tool. I think depending on your job, you might go for a specialised tool. But conversational agents are great for general knowledge stuff. If I want to bounce ideas about how to run a meeting more effectively, I'll use Microsoft Copilot, which is like ChatGPT, right? But if I want something specific for coding, software engineering, I'll use a very specific tool that's trained on code.
Does Steadfast have a plan to create their own tool?
We're at an unusual size. We're big enough to care, but not big enough that we can have a team to build your own model. However, as an organisation, we're going to bake in AI capability into our products that we build for our broker network. So yes, we've got a roadmap now where we're going to do that and embed it into those tools that we've already built for our brokers. But internally, we'll lean more on off-the-shelf technology, but we'll be very selective about which technology we use.
And there are no more questions online.
Great. Okay. Well, I don't know how many people attended, but thank you all for attending wherever you were in the world. So thank you very much. And I think we can adjourn the session.
Fabulous.